All right, back to topic 5. We had talked a lot about all the different types of lipids, of course, and the different types of fats. And we were talking about triglycerides and fatty acids and, of course, cholesterol. And there were other fats we were talking about. We were talking about phospholipids and fat-soluble vitamins and some of those things we'll get into a little bit later in other units. And in particular, we were talking a lot about the different fatty acids. So the fatty acids, of course, are part of the triglycerides. So if you remember a triglyceride, I drew a little structure. It kind of looks like this. You've got glycerol there as the backbone, and then you've got 3 fatty acids kind of like that. And the fatty acids can have different properties. They can be saturated. So saturated means no double bonds. And saturated also means that they're usually solid at room temperature. And so we call these things fats. The other type, of course, are the unsaturated ones. And the unsaturated ones do have double bonds, and they tend to be liquid at room temperature. And they tend to be healthier for you. There is, and something I had started getting into is trying to tell you a little bit about the science around trying to understand what is going on with these things, right? There is a correlation between diets that are high in saturated fats and increases in things like heart disease. And I think that's about where we'd finished off. But as I had also mentioned that the science is complicated, because, well, there's lots of exceptions out there, and it turns out that genetics is a pretty strong part of it as well. There are some people that can eat high fat, high saturated fat diets, high cholesterol diets, and that's not really the deal for them. That's not what's increasing the risk. And then there's other people that, of course, the genetics is a lot higher. And like I said last time too, it's really hard to just say saturated fats are bad, because turns out there's probably some that are worse for you and some that are better for you, because there's a whole bunch of them. And you know, genetics, and like I said, there's so many other complicated risk factors, right? Some people exercise a lot, some people are very sedentary. There's so many things that that come into the risk for heart disease. And so this is just showing what some of the science is indicating, is that an increase in saturated fats does, in many cases, lead to a small increase in the bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, which also leads to a small increase in heart disease. So it is something that most of the science seems to be agreeing on, but exactly how much is where the nuances is. And the other thing I wanted to point out, and we're going to talk a little bit about fats in the diet as well, is that most of us are not vegetarians. Most of us are not going to be avoiding saturated fats entirely. And in fact, there's a lot of good nutrients in foods that have saturated fats and cholesterol in them. Eggs, shellfish, liver, those things are actually very nutritious foods. The whole idea, though, again, is all comes down to moderation. So I want to talk today about a little bit about fats in the diet, and kind of around some of these recommendations and things like that. And in terms of you know, what we think we should be doing anyway. So one of the approaches, of course, to trying to avoid saturated fats and dietary cholesterol is trimming the fat around the edges, things like that. And then, of course, you know, choosing that diet so that you're not eating only saturated fats all day. You know, so a certain percentage of your calories and whatnot. And of course, you know, the big thing is there's probably more benefit from actually just eating lots of fruits and vegetables, or at least having that a good part of your diet, because you're getting the benefits from those. Again, you know, this is all part of that healthy balance. And the balance is the thing that I think most of us have a hard time kind of reaching at times. But, you know, you can do it with practice. So let me show you some examples from the textbook of what can be done. So there's looks like a pork chop, and there's fat around the edge. Trim the fat off. There goes 60 calories. Doesn't seem like a lot. There's actually quite a bit of fat in that pork chop. But the point is that they're trying to make is you don't need to be consuming that fat generally. Most of us probably don't need those extra calories. That may not be true for everybody in all places in the world. There are something like, I think the estimate is about 500 million children worldwide are maybe calorie deprived, right? So like I said, this isn't necessarily everybody, but for many of us, this is the goal, is to get rid of some of that saturated fat. And an easy way to do it is when it's visible, is trim it away. Here's another example, right? Potato in itself is mostly starch. There's lots of good nutrients in the skin, and you can see the differences here between that one potato that has 1 tablespoon of butter and 1 tablespoon of sour cream. This is the kind of thing where I think there's a little bit of debate around this, right, in terms of what to do, because I'm not going to eat that potato plain. The butter is the good part in my mind. But maybe I don't need to add 3 tablespoons of butter. Maybe I'm good with 1 tablespoon of butter, those kind of things. And, there are lots of recipes for alternatives that are lower fat and things like that. And it's something that if you're trying to cut down on your fats, it might be worth experimenting around with. Or you can get rid of the butter entirely and try unsaturated fats. I've heard of some people using various types of oils on their potatoes, vegetable oils that would be low in saturated fat. So anyway, like I said, these are suggestions from the textbook. There's no right way to do things. And of course, there's thousands and thousands of different diet plans that will all tell you that they know how to do things. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. Moderation is kind of the key. Again, there's lots of products out there that have reduced fat or they're fat-free. So, a good classic example is dairy products. There's a range of dairy products that range from full fat to low fat to fat-free, and just skim milk versus whole milk. Again, this is something too that's a matter of preference, right? I know some people who just can't drink skim milk. I mean, honestly, it tastes a little bit like water, particularly if you're used to whole milk. But you can trim down, maybe go down to 2% or something like that. So, of course, the other kind of way to look at it is to take a look at the big contributors, of course, right? So this is one chart. There's tons of charts like this you can find on the internet and other places in terms of where are all these saturated fats coming from, right? And you can see the usual suspects in the diet is fast food and other convenience foods, right? So pizza, hamburgers, sandwiches, submarines, baked goods, those kind of things. And you can often do yourself a favor by making better choices around those kind of things. I think I kind of complained before, it's not always easy, right? You pull into, you're driving to Edmonton and you go to grassland. What are your choices, right, for food? But again, that's a trip. Presumably, you're not doing that every day, and we can splurge and indulge certainly. Just trying not to do it every day is the thing. You can see some of the other culprits around here, right? Chicken tends to be low fat, but it is an animal product and does have some saturated fats in it. But you can see that these fast foods and processed foods kind of are huge contributors to this whole thing. Another one to look at is just what's in your vegetable oils. I told you before that coconut oil is actually a pretty big, very guilty oil. And it was, I don't know what, I remember this was a few years ago now. It was like coconut oil this, coconut oil that. There was a lot of push for coconut oil as being an amazing, healthy, I don't even know what people were using it for. I guess alternative to butter in some cases. And it actually has more saturated fat than actual butter does. So amazing, right? But like I said, there's a lot of substitutes you can make. Olive oil in particular, and we're going to talk about olive oil today, and canola oil are actually very, very healthy alternatives to a lot of these other options. They tend to have a lot of other phytochemicals in there that probably have health effects. Again, you don't want to be guzzling these things by the gallon, but substituting olive oils for butter, there's lots of ways to do that in various recipes, and it can be quite delicious in many cases. So some other recommendations, right? I think I had mentioned that the risk factor for high blood cholesterol, the big one actually is ingestion of saturated fats and obesity. But ingestion of dietary cholesterol is where it really gets murky. And we think for some people what happens is when you eat cholesterol, your body doesn't need to make it. And if you eat excess cholesterol, then you may have excess cholesterol in the blood. Notice I said may, because as I mentioned, there seems to be a really big, strong genetic link about this. I think I mentioned before the stat is about 60% of us can eat excess cholesterol and have little increase in our blood cholesterol. And this is a relatively new finding in the last 20 years. The old wisdom used to be avoid the egg yolks if you're at risk of heart disease, because it's going to spike your blood cholesterol. And that might not be a bad recommendation either, because a small percentage of us do respond to dietary cholesterol, and it greatly increases our blood cholesterol. So again, there's never one size fits all. We're going to talk about body weight and healthy habits around that in a later unit, and I'll kind of get into some of those things a bit more. But I think I also mentioned that many of these high cholesterol foods are actually very nutritious for you. Just again, we don't want to be eating an omelet made out of 8 eggs. Maybe that's probably overindulgence, never mind the amount of calories packed into that kind of thing. So like I said, lots to say about genetics and things like that, which is something that we would love to know more about. But like I said, if we want to avoid blood cholesterol, what we want to do is decrease our trans fats, and I'm going to talk about trans fats in a minute. We want to decrease our saturated fats. And this one here is probably the worst. The saturated fats, it's a small percentage, but the trans fats, it's massive. It is huge what it can do to blood cholesterol. And we're going to get to that in a minute. So just remember that your blood cholesterol level matters. Your food cholesterol probably doesn't for at least 60% of us. The other 40%, there's kind of varying amounts of how much the dietary cholesterol actually matters. So exercise matters, and we're going to have a whole unit on exercise, so we'll kind of get there. I was hoping to incorporate a little bit more as we go along, but there's tons of studies done on the benefits of exercise, and just want to kind of hint on them now, right? Since we are talking about heart, one thing about exercise is it increases your HDL. Remember HDL? Hooray for HDL! That is the good cholesterol. So we want to do that. We want to increase the good cholesterol, and we want to decrease the LDL, right? Exercise, it improves the overall health of your vascular system, right? So it improves circulation, gives you a stronger heart. Your heart can actually get bigger, so it can pump more blood and not work as hard, those kind of things. And we can grow leaner, and when you're leaner, you're less obese, and of course that reduces stress on the heart and risk for diabetes and things like that. I see, sorry, Monique, I missed your question there. You're asking about canola being a GMO. I'm not sure what the percentage is on that, but much of canola is a GMO, and we're going to talk about GMOs later on. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. There's a lot that I could say, but a little bit of a transgression on everything, but we'll come back to GMOs for sure. So another thing to consider about fats is we can't cut them out entirely. Some fats are essential foods. So that means we can't make them, or at least our body can't make them in high enough quantities. So we need to actually have them in the diet. And there's technically 2 essential fats. Now, I have seen other lists out there that list other fats as essential, And that's not fully true. We can make those other fats, some out of these ones here. But if you're not getting these ones here, then the other ones might be, or if you're not getting enough of these two, then the other ones are kind of essential. So I guess you could call it conditionally essential, but these are the two that are the most essential. And I hate their names, honestly. Linoleic acid and linolenic acid. I always get the two mixed up. Now the textbook doesn't put the alpha in front of this one here. I don't know why it doesn't do that, but the proper name is alpha linolenic acid. So these two are actually omega fatty acids, meaning they have those double bonds in those positions, right? So omega-3, if you remember, means we're starting at the end of the chain and we go 1, 2, and 3, and then there's the double bond, and the 6 we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so this is carbon number 6 here. I labeled that incorrectly. They're found in a variety of food sources. A lot of vegetable sources, and in particular the omega-3 fatty acids are famous for being found in fatty fishes, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But like I said, found in a variety of food sources, and most people have nothing to worry about, because if you have a variety of foods in your diet, you're going to get them somewhere. I think the question is, how much should we get? And I think there are some recommendations around it, and there are some dietitians who believe we should be increasing our alpha linolenic acid like crazy, and I think that's where it starts to get a little sketchy in terms of the in terms of the science. But I'll kind of get into that in a minute. So why are they essential? Because we just don't have the enzymes to put those double bonds in those spots, right? And so I guess plants can do it and fish can do it. Humans can't, which is not 100% true. We do make some of these alpha fatty acids, not these two. And the most notable exception are some of these fats that are put into breast milk. So mothers make them for their babies. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Something is that these fatty acids are used to make a variety of other compounds out there. One group of compounds are these ones here. So icosanoids. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that. I've seen the word 100 times, but I've never actually looked it up how to say it. Icosanoids? I don't know. Doesn't really matter how to say it. Basically, what are they, right? These are compounds that are made out of fatty acids, and they're often involved in regulatory processes. So they're kind of like hormones. Hormones generally travel through the blood, right? These are more kind of, let's say, shorter range chemical signatures and chemical messengers in the body. So they might, help your muscles relax and contract, blood clot formation, and there's a whole list of them. You can look it up. It doesn't really matter. My main point is that these fatty acids are essential for making other compounds. And in fact, they make other things besides these icosanoids. I don't have the list off the top of my head, but I know that that's why they're essential, because we need them to make other things, which are important for our bodies. And so again, another reason to have a nice, healthy diet with lots of variety. Variety is very good. So there are other, like I said, other omega fatty acids. And these are the ones, when people say omega fatty acids, these are the exact fatty acids that people are usually talking about. So these two here, remember, are essential for the diet because we can't make them, or at least we can't make them in large enough quantities, but I don't think we make them at all. This one here, the arachidonic acid, sometimes that's in a list of essential fatty acids, but it's not essential. It's not essential if you get enough of the linoleic acid in your diet. But if you don't have enough linoleic acid in your diet, then you do need it. And it's coming mostly from animal products. So again, if you are a vegan or vegetarian of some sort, sometimes trying to get that, good, healthy variety in your diet is going to be really essential. The alpha-linolenic acid, like I said, found in many plants and nuts and things like that, found in fatty fishes. I guess that should be on here. It should say fatty fish. I don't actually know what the difference between a fatty fish and a non-fatty fish is. It's something I have to look up. It probably has something to do with different species. I'm guessing salmon is a lot less fatty than other fishes, but I don't actually know the answer to that. But you just see them always talking about fatty fishes. So probably different species and whatnot. And I'll talk about fish here in a minute. These other two here, there's DHA, so docosahexaenoic acid, and EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. And I notice I have the British spelling of those. I don't think these E's here are actually required. Or actually, that's heptaenoic acid. So yes, they are required. I'm just looking at that, thinking about the organic chemistry there. So these here, as I mentioned, are made by mothers for their babies in the breast milk. And these have links to actual brain and other types of development. And they're also found in high quantities in fish. And I think I have a little chart here that shows you other foods that they're made in. And so just give me a moment here. So these are something that have been really pushed for at least 20 years now as something that we should really be making sure kids have a lot of. And so, we do make some of it for ourselves. But like I said, the main area that we make it is in the breast milk for babies. And so there's, like I said, a lot of people pushing it as saying this is something essential for all children. And I think the science is a little bit murky in there about how much children actually need. But they are found abundantly in certain fishes. And so you're starting to see, and you may see this a lot of diet plans and whatnot are recommending that you eat fish 2 times a week, fatty fish. And particularly if you're trying to, have a heart healthy kind of diet, because there does seem to be a lot of evidence to suggest that having fish regularly does promote good heart health. And they think it has something to do with these 2 fatty acids. Of course, if you're going to have fish, they recommend that you bake it or grill it or broil it rather than deep frying it in saturated fats, because the saturated fats, of course, are going to counteract that heart health effect. My tongue is just tied today. Like I said, I thought I had a graph here in a second that kind of shows some of the sources of these things. But there's tons of intense research interest on this. And the biggest one that we seem to have a good correlation between is heart health. And part of this actually came from people looking at diets of different people around the world. And if you look at, I think I mentioned last day, the native people of Greenland, Alaska, and northern Canada traditionally have eaten a very high fat diet. They were eating a lot of animal foods, seals and fish and things like that traditionally. And traditionally, they had a very low rate of heart disease. So what is going on? This seems to be exactly opposite to all the wisdom, right? In terms of, trying to cut down on animal products, having more plants in your diet, and cutting down on saturated fats and those kind of things. And the research seems to point back to these particular fatty acids and the fish oil in the diet. At least I'm not sure how far the research is there, but there's a very strong correlation in terms of what is going on there. So presumably these things are lowering blood cholesterol somehow or something like that. Unfortunately, younger generations of people in these areas, their diets have become a lot more, I'm not going to say the word modern, but we'll say, let's say unhealthy westernized diets. And so less marine-based food. And now we're looking at these people groups, we're looking at much higher rates of blood pressure and diabetes and obesity and things like that. But there is research on all of these areas here, right? You can see immunity, cancer prevention, membranes, brain function, and so lots of intense interest in this. And I see all over the place these recommendations around eating grilled fish. This is from the textbook. I guess I had said already a lot of this already. Notice here in infants, there is good data showing that in infants, that those fatty acids are linked to normal brain development and vision, apparently. I don't know much about the vision part, but I have read a little bit about the proper brain development. The cancer part is, again, one of those ones where the research isn't quite there yet. There's some suggestions in epidemiological research that it may prevent certain cancers, but then again, this could be a confounding effect, because if you have a healthy heart and you're a leaner individual, obesity is actually much more linked to cancers than eating these fish oils. And you know, it's one of those things where having excess body weight, it seems to unfortunately contribute to a lot of bad health effects that we don't want. I didn't put this in your PowerPoints because I just was looking in my fridge, and after I posted the notes up, and I noticed I had this in my fridge. And I was like, oh, I didn't notice that before. I know I've purchased this product before, but when I buy margarine, you know, often I just look at what's on sale. And I mean, I used to look at certain margarines because of trans fats, which is not a concern anymore, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. But I was looking at this, and you can see it's made with avocado oil. And I guess I didn't take a picture of the side of the margarine bin, but it did have a little blurb about the omega fatty acids. And you can see that they actually have this in the nutrition label, saying that they have some amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. So it's not just fish. There are a lot of plants that have them in. The fish oil just has it in much larger quantities. So notice saturated fats, there is a little bit in there. So you can have some plant products with saturated fats. They just have a lot less than your typical animal products, with coconut oil, of course, being the big bad one. Yeah, I thought I had a list of other sources of omega fatty acids. Maybe I don't. Maybe I was looking at that somewhere in the textbook or something like that. But fish and a good variety of vegetables and nuts. I'm sure there's lots of sources on the internet. There are cases, by the way, and kind of just going back to the essential fatty acids of you know, people that are, you know, starvation and nutrient deficits, and so there is some good data to show that people who are having these deficiencies have issues. But again, usually people having extreme deficiencies are having extreme deficiencies also in proteins and certain vitamins and those kind of things. But you can see kind of, you know, this is a little chart I found that's talking a little bit about that. And we mentioned some of these things already. Brain development right here. And of course, overall growth and development in children, right? It's really important that children do get healthy diets. So I want to talk about these fish oil supplements. There's a lot of controversy over these things. I'm just looking at the photos I have here. Sometimes you'll see there's tons out there. I was looking in the store a while ago and was talking about, you know, some of them have DHA and EPA in them. These ones here are, at least the one on the bottom is fish oil. I'm not sure what the one on the top is. I was just looking for a quick Google search for fish oils, and that's what came up. I guess I didn't take a very good look at that, at the container, so I don't know what's in the top one. But a lot of dietitians are not recommending these things. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. So why eat the fish and not just eat the fish oil? It turns out the fish oils, you know, and again, with a lot of supplements, right? They fall into that food category, and they're not regulated the way drugs would be. Drugs are very, very regulated very, very strictly. Food products, including supplements, are a lot less so. And it turns out when they make a lot of these fish oils, they're not taking the meat and getting the oil from the meat, because of course that meat is valuable. It's going to end up in a restaurant or at the grocery store or whatever. And so often they're actually extracting the fish oils from the skin. And then this means that they have high concentrations of other things. So sometimes high concentrations of vitamin A and vitamin D, you're probably thinking, what's wrong with vitamin A and vitamin D? The problem is those two vitamins can build up in the body to toxic amounts. And if you're pregnant or you're a small person, those are some huge risk areas, right? Where you're going to build them up to toxic levels. And that's something that wants to be avoided. And there's some research behind these things. I'm going to talk about supplements a bit more later on in the semester. But the reality is with supplements, a lot of us don't need to take most of them. Now, there's always cases where it's a good idea. But the reality is a lot of people are over abusing these things. And some of these things, like there have not been long-term studies done on these fish oil supplements, right? So, I mean, this is something, and some of these studies indicate some of these things listed here, right? Raising LDL, increased bleeding, so interfering with blood clotting. I don't even know what's going on there in terms of biologically, suppressing immune function and whatnot. I hate it when people throw out immune function out there because most people don't know what they're talking about. But it's on the list of things that may be a concern. Another thing too with these fish oils, sometimes they're made out of livers as well. And livers can have high concentrations of things I've mentioned, vitamin A, vitamin D, and sometimes mercury as well. And because this is from fish, and you may or may not know, but some fish have high concentrations of mercury in them. And so should these things be taken, the big recommendation is probably not for most people. Again, maybe this will change. Maybe in the future, Health Canada will start to have stricter regulations around supplements, and we'll have higher quality supplements in the future. So that would be kind of the hope anyway. So the best thing people can do is actually eat food and try not to take shortcuts. All right, what else do we have to say here? Oh, yes, we want to talk about trans fats. There's so much I could say about trans fats. In fact, the textbook goes on maybe a little bit longer than it should, because there's a very good news part of this story. So let's talk about what a trans fat is. This is kind of, again, a little bit of a chemistry thing going on for you. But here's what we're trying to do, right? In some cases, for some foods, what we're trying to do is we have an unsaturated fat. So you have an oil, a liquid, from a plant. And sometimes we want a solid. So maybe we're making margarine. And this is kind of the biggest area that this was done was in the margarine industry. And notice I had said past tense, and we'll get to that in a second. So here's the idea. You go from unsaturated to saturated, and you can do this. It's actually relatively easy from a chemistry standpoint to do this. You just have to add hydrogen and a catalyst, and you can do this. And so you can go from a liquid oil and then have some sort of solid or semi-solid fat, and now you have margarine. And it's great because it's cheap, and the wisdom was that margarine is more healthy for you than butter, because of course margarine is a plant product, and all those kind of things, and there's no cholesterol in it, et cetera, right? And like I said, this is super cheap. So you used to be able to buy a tub of margarine for like $1. And this wasn't that long ago. I mean, like 10 years ago, easily you could find a tub of margarine for like $1, the cheap margarines. And those were the ones I was avoiding. And I'll explain why that is in a moment, because unfortunately, what happens is that some of those fatty acids don't get converted to these hydrogenated ones. In fact, they turn into something called trans. And again, this has to do with the shape. So notice this normal one here, it has a certain shape to it, and the trans one is more of a zigzag shape. And so what's the big deal about this zigzag shape kind of thing, you're probably wondering. Well, here's the problem, is that our bodies, we don't really have the mechanisms to break them down, at least efficiently. And these things linger, and they linger in the arteries, and they are terrible for your health. The science is very clear on this, that trans fats should be avoided almost entirely. They raise blood cholesterols, LDL cholesterols. They lower the good cholesterol. They lower the HDL cholesterols. They can produce inflammation in various parts of the body. and they're bad, 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 bad for the health, bad for the heart, and very bad. Okay, so now suddenly everyone's thinking, I'm going to go eat butter now instead of margarine, right? But there's good news around this. I think I have it on my next slide here. Here's the good news, is that these have been phased out for a while now, and I think it was as of 2020, they were completely phased out by Health Canada, meaning that you can't add trans fats to things anymore. So the price of margarines have gone up, and that's a good thing because we're getting rid of the cheap, bad products for us. So I mentioned that I was avoiding certain types of margarines, and just going back to this slide here, this is the thing to avoid, right? Avoid hydrogenated vegetable oil. So when I was buying my margarines, I'd always look at the ingredients and see what it said about hydrogenated vegetable oil. And if it had hydrogenated vegetable oil in it, I was like, nope, I'm not buying that one. It has trans fats in it to significant quantities. Now, like I said, this is something we don't have to worry about anymore, at least in Canada. In the US and most of Europe, other parts of the world, I think they're a little bit behind in terms of banning these things. And I'm going to keep talking about these for another minute or two, because there's a few things that I still need to say about them. One is that they're not gone entirely. Okay, there are some trans fats made in small quantities by animals, and those ones tend to be digestible. They're still not as good for you. The digestion is slow, but the naturally made trans fats you can't avoid them entirely, particularly if you're eating animal products. But having them in small quantities is probably not a big deal, particularly if you're having the naturally made ones. It's the hydrogenated ones that are the big concern. I was looking at this is from the textbook. Now the textbook I think was published in 2019 when these were still in the products, and so it's saying, you know, where do we find these trans fats? And I imagine that this has changed entirely now, and so I'm kind of waiting for some updated information on this. You can see all this is like at least 10 years ago now. And but you'll see a lot of these graphics and information on the internet of where the trans fats are found, and this is going to be dramatically changed. I see there's a comment there. I'm sorry I missed it. It says a pediatrician recommends omega-3 and omega-6 as for my 10-year-old to help with ADHD, and they did make a difference. Yeah, so there are cases where they do make a difference for sure. And like I said, in terms of the supplements, it is really confusing. I think what they're recommending, at least recently, is avoiding the fish oil ones, but there are other sources of them for sure, plant sources and otherwise. And, you know, the supplement industry is not as, unfortunately, it's not as regulated as it should be, really. And I think there's a lot of calls for that, but it's so hard to change, unfortunately. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about supplements later on in the semester for sure. There's something else I noticed. So one of the other things I was going to say about this trans fat story is, so years ago, I don't know when it was, I remember learning about trans fats and I'm like, oh, I should cut these out of my diet. So I changed my buying habits around margarines. And then I realized that, oh no, peanut butter has hydrogenated vegetable oil in it. So if you take a look, this is from peanut butter. And I just took this picture, and here's the thing. This is peanut butter I bought like a couple of weeks ago, and it says hydrogenated vegetable oil. Now, years ago, I remember being concerned about this, and I switched to the natural peanut butter, so the one that's not pre-mixed with no sugar in it, thinking, oh, this is great, it's going to be healthier for me. And I did that for a couple of years, until I eventually got exhausted from mixing that peanut butter. I hated it. It was so much work mixing that peanut butter. And so I went on Kraft's website, and they actually had a little article about it. And it basically said, yes, we add hydrogenated vegetable oil to our products, but the amount of trans fats is undetectable, is what they said. Yesterday, I went on the Kraft website. I could not find the same article. They just basically said about trans fats that they've been changing their products, and that due to health regulations and health concerns. So I'm not sure what this means, because my understanding is that hydrogenated vegetable oils have been completely banned. So I'm not sure what this is all about. Maybe it's a different process that doesn't produce trans fats. But you can see that it's telling me that, at least at the moment, there's no trans fats that are detectable in a serving of peanut butter. So I did switch back eventually to the regular peanut butter when I started reading the nutrition labels, because quite honestly, I hate mixing it. And I think this stuff tastes better. But again, that's one of those opinion kind of things. And some people are really into peanut butter, and we'll talk about the different brands and whatnot. I really like peanut butter, and I really like not having to mix it, unfortunately. So I was looking in my house, by the way, and trying to find something that had trans fats in it. And I finally found something. This is butter. And there it is, right there. Sorry about the photo. It was already opened. And I'll come back to butter in a second, but you can see trans fats. So in one serving, 0.2 grams. And I was actually looking on the internet, and not all butters, there's different numbers. I think some said 0, some said 0.1 and whatnot. And I don't know what the difference is between the different butters, quite honestly. But, so probably getting a little bit of trans fats in my diet. Like I said, in very small moderations. I think the dietary recommendations are saying, less than 1% of your overall diet is not a concern. And again, if you are eating animal products, you will get small quantities of trans fats. Small quantities is not a big deal, particularly if they're not made artificially. Okay, so like I said, if you go out there, you're gonna read tons and tons of stuff on trans fats. And like I said, the good news is we're not allowed to add it to our products anymore. The last thing maybe I wanted to mention is why we're adding all these trans fats, and I kind of hinted on it. There's kind of two good reasons why trans fats were amazing. One is that they were super cheap to make, right? If you're adding butter to everything, that's super expensive. But if you're making these cheap margarines, think of all the products that require some sort of margarine in them, such as peanut butter and whatnot. And then think about all of the restaurants out there that are deep frying things and whatnot. And that's the other reason why they were making these trans fats, not necessarily trying to make trans fats, but doing this hydrogenation process, is that it actually helps the oils to stay fresh longer. They don't go rancid. And so you can imagine restaurants who have these deep fries, you have that oil just sitting out all day long. So having your oil not go rancid is huge for restaurants, right? And but now that these things are banned, I'm not sure what they've done in a lot of cases. Obviously, they've substituted other products that they've been able to find. In the case of margarines, you can see they've gone and they're starting to use a bigger variety of different types of fats to make semi-solid products, olive oils, and there's extraction processes where you can take out different fats and so on, right? And but I think there's also different ways to get around that in terms of preservatives and whatnot. And again, I'm not really a food expert, and I would have to look into the details on that. So kind of back to butter or margarine, right? People love to debate this one here. Butter has saturated fat and cholesterol and some trans fats. It's probably not as good for you as most soft margarines. And that's where the science really is right now. Which tastes better? Again, matter of preference. I absolutely love butter. And I figure if I'm having a tablespoon of butter a day, that's probably not a bad thing. My body can handle small amounts of trans fats, it can handle all sorts of things. And if I look at the benefit of butter, having butter on a fresh piece of toast compared to margarine is just, it makes my morning. And I'm fine with that. Again, moderation is the whole thing around it. Always take a look at the labels, right? You never know, it's always a good thing to find out what's in your products. And I think the same thing with margarine, by the way. Both margarine and butter, by the way, have about the same amount of calories per tablespoon. So don't fool yourself in thinking you're getting less calories if you eat margarine and thinking you can eat a lot more margarine. It's about the same amount of calories. Although there are some, I've noticed once in a while, some low fat kind of substitute products and all that. And you know, if you want, try them. But for me, I'm sticking with butter because I love it. I'm gonna just try not to overdo it. But anyway, that's kind of where the science is at. Like I said, there's a lot of debates around it too. Again, you know, something going around looking at these fats and saturated fats and things like that is, again, looking at the labels and seeing what's going on. You can see this is showing the fat content in all sorts of different products. And something that I've been doing in my own diet is using a lot more ground turkey and ground chicken rather than ground beef. And there tends to be a lot less fat in these kind of products. Ground chuck and ground round, I think these are different parts of the animal. I'd have to look at that. But it's not just about looking at the animal, because chuck and round, these are beef or pork, and you can see that the round is actually 10% fat. And again, it depends on what part of the animal they're getting it from and those kind of things. And sometimes it's worth it to take a look. A lot of ground turkey and ground chicken, sometimes they grind the skin in there with it, and that has a lot of fat in it. So just because you're just buying ground turkey, it doesn't necessarily mean you're always necessarily getting less fat, kind of thing. So worth it looking at the labels. But that is one substitute that a lot of recipes are saying is, you know, rather than using regular ground beef, find the extra lean or use some ground chicken, or you know, maybe even doing 50-50, 50% ground beef and 50% ground chicken or ground turkey. And it does make a pretty big difference. When I switched to doing this, particularly with hamburgers, you know what, a ground turkey burger on itself is, in my mind, it's not very good. It's almost too dry, right? So all my ground hamburgers now, I do 50-50, 50% lean ground beef and 50% ground chicken or ground turkey. And it makes a wonderful product. It's not greasy. Barbecue isn't in flames all the time. And they taste really good. So anyway, like I said, just something else to think about your choices. And I think I mentioned this before, you know, with milk products, there's so many dairy products out there for milk and cheese and ice cream and things like that. And here's just a selection of some of these things showing the differences between, you can see we have fat-free milk up at the top here. We have low-fat cheddar cheese. And you know, this is why the nutrition labels are worth it to look at. And as I've mentioned before, sometimes, you know, like taste does matter, right? You know, there's a lot of low fat yogurts that I won't touch. They're just awful. And but then again, how much yogurt am I going to have? Am I going to have a giant bowl full or just a little bit? And again, finding that moderation, I think, is really the key. You know, we want to enjoy our foods, but we want to make sure we have a healthy balance of things. And rather than making let's say my lunch, you know, sometimes I'm tempted for lunch. You know, I open the fridge, there's a giant thing of yogurt there, and I do like some of the high fat yogurts, and I'm very tempted to like eat the whole thing, right? And that's what I certainly did as a student. I remember as a university student, you know, how many things did I have in my fridge? Like 3 things, right? The yogurt, okay, I'm gonna eat that whole thing. You know, now what I've been trying to do is kind of, you know, when I have that lunch, I'm like, okay, let's you know, it took me a while to kind of get to this practice, but to think first about the vegetables and fruit, right? So now when I make my lunch, the very first thing I do is say, okay, what vegetables and fruit do I have? So I gather those things first, think about what I want to eat, and then I supplement with other products, protein and fat, right? So maybe I get a little yogurt or whatever, right? And that way I know I'm not going to just eat the entire yogurt. And I still get to enjoy it, right? Like I said, that took some training in myself in order to do these things. There's so many different products out there, particularly dairy products, which something I really like a lot. Again, these are just some suggestions here, right? Some people overdo it on the cheeses, and that's another thing to consider. And again, cheese is absolutely delicious. I don't know if anyone else is getting hungry, but I'm starting to think about lunch now. What about grain products, right? Generally, grain products on their own are kind of on the lower fat category. But many grain products are processed into other things. And you can see some of the examples here, different types of crackers and croissants and biscuits and muffins. All those things have added fats, added oils. Croissants was actually the biggest surprise for me when I started to pay more attention to how many calories were in things. I think 100, so this, I'm looking at the croissant here down at the bottom. It says 171 calories. I think that's actually a small croissant. I'm trying to remember, I had croissants a couple of weeks ago in my house and I thought it was like 300 calories. I really can't recall. I just remember being shocked at how many were in that thing. But then I started, I actually spent some time on the internet and looked at, what goes into a croissant. And then it wasn't surprising, right? There's, depending on you make a lot of butter or margarine or oils or things like that. So not surprising at all. So again, this is just to encourage people to, take a look at those labels and think about what is actually in these things. Okay, so a few more things to say about fats. There are fat substitutes out there. And this is something I don't know a ton about. I know a little bit about olestra, and the textbook goes on about olestra forever, which is really unfortunate because it's supposed to be a Canadian textbook and it's not even available in Canada. But this is something that has gained a ton of hype in the States because it's a fat substitute. It's actually kind of a cool idea. What they've done is they've taken sucrose and they've added fatty acids to it. So it hits the right receptors in your mouth and tastes like fat and gives you kind of a full feeling. And there's a whole bunch of products made out of this in the States. But here's the thing, right? You may see this little label I have here. Overconsumption can lead to cramping, diarrhea, a few unpleasant things like that. And so that's kind of a big deal. And I think there's been people who binge on this stuff because they're thinking I can eat all the chips I want and not get fat. And then of course you end up with the unfortunate side effects. I'm not really sure of the story as to why it has not been approved in Canada. This product has been out for at least 10 years now. I have no idea what the story is behind that. Maybe some point it'll be part of maybe, I don't think anybody did an infographic on this. I was hoping to read a bit more about it, but it's an interesting food additive. There's a whole bunch out there. I'm not familiar with most of these products, quite honestly. And usually they have different reasons why they might be added to things, right? Sometimes you're adding fat to give texture to the food. Sometimes you're adding fat to give taste. Sometimes you're adding fat to, give emulsifying effects to foods and things like that. And so again, this is something that, if you get into cooking and whatnot, there's tons of suggestions out there. And I thought I had a slide about some of the suggestions. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's coming up about what you can do in your baking and whatnot to make your cookies or your muffins or whatever lower fat and all that. And I know I have a slide coming up on that and some suggestions here, and I'll get to that in a minute. Something that we often talk about, is you can think of your having your diet around as defensive dining, right? And the whole idea, like I said, we're not trying to eliminate fats entirely. That's probably a bad thing. But kind of, we're hoping people will get towards having a better balance of things. And of course, all these things are reasons why. And I was going to point out, I'm not sure what happened to that link there. Must have something else on this slide. There was a really nice quiz. I think it was the American Heart Association. I couldn't find it. It's going to show it to you. And the link was dead, at least as of yesterday. That kind of can give you a little quiz around on healthy eating habits when you dine out. I found this other one here. I haven't actually had a chance to go through the whole thing, but it's kind of similar idea in terms of dining out habits. Here's the slide that I meant to put a little earlier. So like I said, there's tons and tons of suggestions out there on how to make all these products that are less fat, so they have less saturated fat in particular, or just lower calories. And some of these just you're substituting low-fat dairy products for the regular dairy products, so mayonnaise and cheeses and sour creams and things like that. And anyway, these are some suggestions. This is a table from the textbook, just talking about some of these things. And I think the context matters depending on what you're doing, right? Salad dressing, for example, again, that's an area where some low-fat salad dressings, I can't tell the difference, and others are just honestly quite terrible. And so that's the kind of thing, right, where experimenting is going to be key for everyone's taste. I know somebody who has this cookie recipe, and I'm just trying to remember. I don't think it has any added butter or margarine into it. I'm trying to remember, they said they had 2 secret ingredients. One was mashed beans and the other was, I don't know, applesauce or something like that. And actually the cookies were pretty good. Not as good as a regular cookie, but surprisingly tasty for what it was. And like I said, lots of people have tricks for these kind of things that may help you. What else we were going to talk about here? Like I said, it's complicated. I think I showed you this slide before, just saying, we can't just vilify fat. Since the 1980s, 1990s, that was the big message back then, was to cut fat out of your diet, and it just didn't work because so many people were substituting sugar instead of fat. And in the 90s, that in particular, that's when the high fructose corn syrup was being produced like crazy. And people were, of course, substituting just calories with calories. The really big thing that people need to do is not just substitute calories for calories, but substitute the fats with healthier alternatives. I guess I touched on some of these things. Let me see here if there's anything else here to mention. Yeah, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the Mediterranean diet. As I mentioned, there are some high-fat diets out there. Like I said, the traditional diets of the native people in northern Canada, Alaska, Greenland, and that's something that scientists are still trying to understand, and they think it has something to do with the high amount of fish in the oil. But another high-fat diet is actually the Mediterranean diet. At least higher fat than a lot of other diets in other parts of the world. So it's kind of worth talking about that for a few minutes. And there's actually been a lot of research done on the Mediterranean diets. I'll come back to this slide here in a minute here, but this is, again, more options. I'm not even going to get into that really. So what is the Mediterranean diet? Maybe let's just talk about that for a second. So the Mediterranean diet is it's an approach or a diet plan or whatever you want to call it. And it's basically based on the food that people around the Mediterranean Sea have naturally adopted, at least in many parts, right? And not everyone around the Mediterranean Sea, but what we're talking about is, areas of France and Greece and Italy and Israel and places like that sort of surround the Mediterranean. And so it turns out that these people are eating a lot of fish. So there's the fish thing again. They're eating a lot of olives and olive oil, and generally they're not eating a lot of other animal fats. They are, but just not in abundance, right? And like I said, you can take a look, and there's tons of Mediterranean eating schemes that you can find on the internet and whatnot. And you can see that this one here, I thought, was kind of one of the better representations of it in terms of, what is forming the basis of this meal. So you can see at the bottom, there's actually lots of grains. Oopsies, sorry about that. Lots of grains and olive oils and other plant oils and things like that. The fish is in here, a lot more, fish at least a couple of times a week and those kind of things. And there does seem to be a lot of research on this that is indicating that it does seem to be a pretty healthy diet for the heart. And people who kind of have a consistent diet like this do seem to be living longer and healthier than a lot of people who are not. Again, it's one diet scheme of many, and it really is the same message all over again. Notice that the whole bottom basis of this thing is basically plant foods. With the fish in there, which seems to be helping with the heart as well. There's a lot of people that have been researching olive oil as well. And again, olive oil has some of those omega fats in it. I can't remember which ones are in the olive oil. And olive oil probably has, actually has a lot of phytochemicals in there. And so the darker olive oils those are the ones that are extra virgin olive oils, are darker, by the way. And those ones actually have more phytochemicals in them. So that's kind of, what the recommendation is, that you go for the extra virgin olive oil because it's better for you, kind of thing, right? But you know what? Olives and olive oil are not a magic potion. Again, it's, there's probably a moderation for that in there, but the reality is most people probably eat a lot of other fats instead of olive oil. So maybe substituting olive oil instead of other things is probably the way to go. So I have bought olive oil margarine a few times now, and it's actually pretty good, but really not that much different than other margarines that I've noticed. So a few other things about diet. Nuts are something that have a lot of fat in them, and you can overdo it on nuts, by the way. But most people don't eat a lot of nuts. Maybe they, other than peanuts, which peanuts aren't even nuts, they're legumes, by the way. But there's a lot of good evidence to show that a couple of servings of nuts can be very good for you. Now, like I said, some people can overdo it. I know somebody who snacked on nuts like crazy, and then at a point later in her life, she wanted to lose weight, and when she started calorie counting, she realized that she was getting about 500 to 600 calories from nuts a day. That's how many nuts she was eating. She was just always had a can of mixed nuts on the table, and she was always snacking on them, and she'd go for walks and carry some with her, and so that was an area that for her was actually very hard to cut down on, because she obviously loved them. But you can't overdo it. They are fattening if you overdo them. But like I said, some very good fats in these nuts, some omega oils and things like that. Another thing, I guess we've kind of talked about this already, is people need to consider where added fats are in, right? You can eat foods that naturally have fats in them, right? Vegetables and meat products and whatnot all have fats in them. But then a lot of products, processed products and baking and things like that, you're adding fats. How much salad dressing are you adding? How much cream cheese are you adding to that bagel? All these are questions that can be asked. Okay, yeah, just the note about how many of them are visible. Again, looking at that nutritional information is key. I had no idea croissants were so fattening, and so I've stopped eating like 2 or 3 in one sitting now. Okay, I want to summarize a couple of things about fats, and I think this is probably pretty straightforward information. So, saturated fats, okay, higher usually in animal products. The exception is coconut oil. These are typically solid at room temperature, which is why we call them fats typically. Maybe I can put that down here, fats. There is evidence that they increase LDL, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, but they probably don't decrease the HDL, which is a good thing. They can contribute to plaques in your arteries, but not nearly as much as trans fats. So trans fats, these are the things to avoid, okay? And again, like I said, the good news is it should be easy to do that now in Canada, since artificially made trans fats are basically banned. So it's going to be much harder for us as Canadians to even get bad quantities of them. We're all going to get small quantities of them, at least if you eat animal products. This is saying margarine. Of course, this means older margarines, that it's not going to be in margarines anymore. Increased risk of heart disease for sure. We don't want them, is what we're saying. We also have the saturated or unsaturated fats, and sometimes a lot of dietary lists group them as to 2 different things: monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. And these are coming from plant products mostly. Various oils, and the polyunsaturated, these are the ones that are often associated with omega, right? These are the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, and these are the ones that they're saying, hey, let's eat a bit more of those, or at least not eat more fat, but substitute, right? So you can almost think of this as a let's try to move in this direction chart. Not necessarily eat more fat, but let's try to eat a bit more mono and polyunsaturated fats rather than the other things. And here's the, yeah, I guess I just drew that. I drew that on the slide, and then here's my animation. So that's kind of the recommendation around fats in general. Okay, let me see where we are here. I have this video here. I'm not going to play this video for you. This kind of summarizes the whole topic, and it's very good. And he's got very good information in there, but kind of not, it's just basically repeating what I said. So I'm not going to play that for you. So that's it for fats, by the way, for now. We do want to move on. We want to talk about that midterm. I was hoping to start topic 6. I don't think I'm going to quite get there today. Uh-oh. But just a reminder, since we're done this topic, topic 5, the quiz for topic 5 will be due in 1 week. So that's next, do I have the date right on that? No, I don't have the date correct on that, do I? Maybe I need to fix that date. So I'll have to check the quiz. Technically, it's due on the 18th, okay? And I know that's the day of the midterm. So you can do it on the day of the midterm, or I'd recommend that you do it ahead of time so you have some practice on this topic. Anyway, that's it for fats. I'm going to shift gears now. And we're going to talk about the midterm.